I woke up to a deep, violent rumble that shook the glass panes beside my bed. For a second, I thought it was an earthquake, but when I pushed the curtains aside, my stomach dropped. 3 bright yellow bulldozers were lined up like armored beasts right outside my property line, their engines growling in the cold morning air. Sunlight bounced off their steel shovels, making them look even more menacing as they pointed toward the Evergreen Seniors Lodge, the old age home just a few steps from my backyard. I felt a rush of panic twist inside me because that building wasn't just a structure to me. It was the last place my mother had lived, and many of the people inside still felt like family. I threw on my boots and ran outside, the gravel cutting into my feet as I sprinted across the yard. The closer I got, the clearer the scene became. Workers in neon vests stood around casually, some sipping coffee, others adjusting their helmets, as if preparing for another routine demolition job. But there was nothing routine about tearing down a building that still had seniors inside. That fact alone pushed adrenaline through my veins. Right in front of the bulldozers stood Karen Whitfield, the HOA president of our neighborhood, Silver Pines. Her posture was rigid, her clipboard hugged to her chest like a badge of rank. She was the kind of person who always looked like she was smelling something unpleasant, even when she wasn't. Today, she wore a tight smile, the kind politicians give when they know something you don't. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted as I approached. Karen didn't even flinch. Instead, she turned slightly, giving me that condescending glance she had perfected over years of playing queen of the HOA. "Morning, Evan. We're beginning the approved project. The Evergreen Lodge will be cleared to make way for the new community eco park. Beautiful plans, really. You'll thank us later." I stared at her, stunned. "The seniors are still inside. You can't just bulldoze a building with people living in it." She raised an eyebrow, as if my concern was an inconvenience. "They've been notified." "Notified?" I walked past her toward the bulldozer cabins. "They don't even know about this. I saw Miss Dorothy last night. She didn't mention moving." None of them did. Several of the workers exchanged awkward glances. One of them muttered, "We were told it was cleared." "It's not cleared," I barked, planting myself directly in front of the lead bulldozer. Its engine roared louder, and the vibrations traveled up my legs, but I didn't move. "Nobody touches that building until someone shows me legal proof." Karen stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "The HOA approved the demolition months ago. Community vote. Majority ruling. You can't stand in the way of progress, Evan." "Then show me the vote," I said. "Show me the paperwork." She smiled like someone amused by a child who didn't understand the rules. "I don't owe you anything, and frankly, you're out of line." Before I could say another word, she leaned in just enough that only I could hear her. "You can block the bulldozer today, but tomorrow morning, at sunrise, we continue, with or without your permission." I felt my jaw tighten. "Karen, this is illegal." She stepped back and signaled to the workers to shut down the engines for now, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. Cold, calculating, certain she had already won. Her voice cut through the silence. "You have 24 hours before we finish what we started." And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing in front of the machine, realizing this was only the beginning. The moment Karen walked away and the bulldozers went silent, I caught a faint drift of lavender in the cold morning air. It floated from the cracked windows of the Evergreen Seniors Lodge, the same scent they used to calm the residents at night. Just smelling it again twisted something deep inside my chest. That lavender had been the last calming breath my mother inhaled during her final weeks here. It was the scent that filled the room when I held her hand and promised her I'd never forget the people who cared for her. That memory hit me so hard I had to close my eyes for a second and steady myself. This fight wasn't just about a building. It was personal. I walked toward the lodge, ignoring the workers staring at me like I was crazy. Inside, the familiar squeak of the old wooden ramp greeted me before I even reached the door. Miss Dorothy was already waiting, her tiny frame wrapped in a pale blue sweater she'd knitted years ago. She looked worried, her eyes darting between me and the bulldozers parked like monsters outside. I knew you'd come, she said softly. I knew you wouldn't let them do this without a fight. Being back inside that place gave me a rush of memories. My mother reading in the sunroom. Mr. Holloway telling me stories from his Navy days. Miss Annie sneaking cookies into my pockets when I visited after work. Over the years I'd spent more hours in this building than in my own house. The residents had become a kind of extended family, filling the space my mother left behind. That's why, the moment she passed, I made the decision to buy the house next door. I wanted to stay close, to look out for them the way they had looked out for her. But lately, every time I visited, I could feel something was wrong. The seniors whispered instead of chatting freely. Rooms that had once felt warm and welcoming now seemed tense and uncertain. Miss Dorothy pulled me aside as soon as we stepped into the hallway. "They've been coming," she said. "Karen and her board members. They walk through the halls with clipboards, pointing at things, talking about code violations and mandatory improvements, but they never explain anything. And last week, they shut off the water for 2 hours, said it was an inspection." My anger flared. "They can't do that," I said. "You're not even HOA property." She nodded. "We told them that, but they said everything was under review." I walked down the hall, the air heavy with uncertainty. This demolition wasn't some sudden idea. It had been brewing beneath the surface for weeks, maybe months. The HOA had been circling the lodge like vultures, waiting for the right moment to strike. When I stepped back outside, the bulldozers sat quietly, but their presence was like a threat carved into the ground. Later that afternoon, after I'd gone home to cool off and try to make sense of everything, I noticed something strange on my porch. A single envelope, no stamp, no return address, slid partially under my front door. I picked it up, already uneasy. Inside was a printed notice stamped with the HOA letterhead. The message was blunt: demolition approved, residents notified, work commencing. But what froze me wasn't the message. It was the date, 3 months ago, and the signature at the bottom looked messy, rushed, nothing like any signature I had ever seen from the actual board members. As I stood there reading it again and again, a chill crawled up my spine. Someone had signed off on this, but it wasn't anyone from the HOA I recognized. By the time evening rolled around, my mind was still spinning from that forged demolition notice. I needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. The HOA was holding a special meeting at the community center, and I knew Karen would be there, waving her clipboard like a sword. As I opened the door and stepped inside, the room felt like it was already suffocating me. Folding chairs were packed tight, neighbors murmuring in low, uneasy voices. Some stared at me with sympathy, others with caution, and a few avoided eye contact altogether. It was clear something big was about to happen. Karen stood at the front, wearing a fitted blazer and an expression of forced authority. Behind her, on a long table, sat 3 thick binders. Her minions from the HOA board clustered around her like a protective wall. I took a seat near the center aisle, close enough to see everything. The air was tense enough that even the sound of someone shifting in their chair made people glance up nervously. Karen cleared her throat and began. "As many of you know, our community voted several months ago to approve the redevelopment plan involving the Evergreen Seniors Lodge. Tonight we finalized the next phase." She opened one of the binders and lifted a stack of papers into the air. "These are the ballots from the vote. As you'll see, the decision was unanimous." Unanimous. That word struck me like a punch. I scanned the faces around the room. A few neighbors exchanged surprised glances, whispering. None of them looked like people who had voted to bulldoze a senior's home. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I stood. "Karen, I'd like to see those ballots." Her smile tightened. "This isn't a Q&A session, Evan. Please sit down." "No," I said, voice firm but controlled. "If the vote was legitimate, then there's no reason I can't review the ballots and meeting minutes. Homeowners have the right to inspect HOA records. That's state law." A ripple went through the room. Karen's jaw twitched. She wasn't expecting anyone to challenge her, especially not with legal grounds. "Confidentiality," she snapped. "The votes contain sensitive homeowner information. The board has decided not to release them." That's not how it works, I insisted. You can redact personal information, but the ballots themselves must be available for review. So must the minutes from the meeting where the vote was approved. If everything is legitimate, why hide it? Her eyes hardened, and for a moment, I saw something behind them. Fear, maybe, but it vanished quickly. She signaled toward two men standing by the exit. They were the so-called HOA security, though everyone knew they were just local guys Karen paid to look intimidating. "Please escort Mr. Miller outside," she said. The guards approached. One grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to show he wouldn't hesitate to use force. The room was silent as they guided me toward the door. The humiliation stung, but beneath it was something stronger. Certainty. All the signs pointed in one direction. Before the guards opened the door, one of them leaned close to me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Check the county office," he said. "It's not what they're telling you." They ushered me out and shut the door behind me, leaving me standing alone in the night air. The parking lot was dark, the hum of conversation muffled behind the walls. I looked up at the building, at the windows glowing with artificial light, and felt the truth settling heavily inside me. If the vote was faked, if the HOA forged records, then the entire demolition plan wasn't just wrong, it might be illegal. The whisper from that guard echoed in my mind the entire drive to the county building the next morning. If the HOA's vote was fake, then the real paper trail, the truth, would be sitting in the county archives. I walked into the records department as soon as the doors opened, the fluorescent lights flickering above rows of metal filing cabinets. A clerk with half-moon glasses looked up at me from behind the counter. When I explained why I was there, her expression shifted from routine disinterest to something more serious. "Evergreen Seniors Lodge? You're asking about the property file?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I need to know who actually owns that land. The HOA claims it's theirs to redevelop." She frowned. Not the kind of frown you give when something is confusing. This was the kind that suggested something wasn't adding up. She typed for a moment, then motioned for me to follow her into the back room. "That land doesn't belong to the HOA at all," she said, pulling out a thick brown folder from a locked cabinet. Her words were like a jolt of electricity. "What do you mean it doesn't belong to them?" She set the folder on a table, flipping it open. "Evergreen Seniors Lodge sits on property managed by the Caldwell Family Trust. Very old. Established in the 1970s. The HOA has no legal authority over it." I stared at the papers, each yellowed at the edges with decades of age. "Then how are they claiming the right to demolish it?" I asked. "That's what I'd like to know," she replied. She pulled out another stack of documents clipped together. "What concerns me is that we recently received new filings related to this trust. Just a few weeks old." She handed me the documents. At first glance, they looked official enough. Transfer requests, redevelopment proposals, even beneficiary approvals. But something was off. Each signature on those forms had the same odd slant, the same pressure marks, the same spacing. Even the way the loops on the letters were shaped looked identical. "These signatures," I said slowly, pointing to them, "they're all written by the same person." The clerk nodded. "I thought so too. But I can't legally accuse anyone without proof. What I can tell you is that these documents don't match the original signatures from the real beneficiary file." She reached back into the cabinet and pulled out a separate envelope. The original beneficiary forms from the Caldwell Trust. When she placed one of the old signatures beside the new ones, the difference was unmistakable. The original was smooth, confident, and elegant, written by someone used to signing legal documents. The new ones looked rushed and inconsistent, like someone trying too hard to mimic handwriting they didn't understand. My heart pounded. "Legally? What does this mean?" She looked at me over her glasses. "Trust-owned property cannot be redeveloped without the living beneficiary's explicit approval. Not implied approval, not forged approval, actual verifiable consent. If the signatures are fake, then whoever filed these documents is committing fraud. Serious fraud." The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as the truth settled into place. Karen and the HOA weren't just pushing a redevelopment plan. They were manipulating legal documents to force it through. This wasn't negligence. It wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate. The clerk hesitated for a moment, then opened one last drawer and pulled out a slim binder. "This came in just last week," she said quietly. "It's a property transfer request, supposedly signed by the surviving Caldwell beneficiary." She slid it across the table toward me. "But the signature," she continued, tapping the page with her finger, "doesn't match the real one on file." I stared at the forged signature, feeling the weight of everything falling into place. Someone was trying to steal the land, and they had almost gotten away with it. I wasn't planning on going anywhere near the HOA office that afternoon, but fate has a strange way of answering questions you're not done asking. I had parked across the street from the community center to think through everything I'd learned at the county records department when I heard a voice I instantly recognized. Karen's. She was standing near the side entrance, her back to me, talking on the phone. I was about to mind my business when a single phrase froze me in place. "We break ground next month." My stomach tightened. Break ground? For what? The supposed eco-park? Something didn't feel right. I stepped out of my truck as quietly as possible and moved closer, staying behind the hedges. Her voice carried more clearly now. "Yes, Grant. Everything is set," she said. "The lodge will be cleared before your team arrives. No delays this time. And make sure your investors know this project is going through." Grant. The name hit me like a warning bell. Karen wasn't talking to another HOA member. She was talking to someone higher, someone with money on the line. I edged around the hedge, careful not to snap a twig. There, halfway hidden behind a column, stood a tall man in a tailored suit. Grant Delaney, a local developer known for luxury properties. I'd seen his billboards around town before, advertising condos that no normal person could afford. Karen lowered her voice. "And once the condos are up, the rest of the board will fall in line. They always do. I've handled the seniors. They won't fight." Hearing her say that made my blood boil. Handled them? These were people she was supposed to protect as a community leader, not push out like they were obstacles on a construction site. I fished my phone out of my pocket and slid my thumb over the record button. My state allowed one-party consent recording, meaning as long as I was part of the environment, I could legally record audio without announcing it. I wasn't going to let her lies drown out the truth any longer. Grant crossed his arms. "And the eco-park? The board keeps mentioning it." Karen laughed softly. "The eco-park is just a cover, a public-facing gimmick to get support on paper. Once the permit shift is approved, the park becomes phase 1 of the luxury tower expansion. No one reads the fine print anyway." My heart raced. The entire park narrative, the votes, the supposed community approval, everything had been engineered to hide a condo project. A project that would displace dozens of elderly residents who had nowhere else to go. I backed away quietly, recording every second, until I reached the edge of the parking lot. I wanted to confront them, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed more evidence. I needed to protect the seniors. Later that evening, I visited the lodge again. The atmosphere was heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Miss Dorothy told me they'd experienced 2 more random power outages that week. The maintenance ramp by the side entrance had been removed for repair, leaving wheelchair-bound residents struggling to get in and out. Another resident said Karen's board had come knocking, warning about safety inspections, and threatening fines if anyone complained. The harassment wasn't just continuing, it was escalating. I left the building feeling sick. If Karen was desperate enough to forge trust documents, coordinate with a developer, and intimidate seniors, then she was willing to push this plan through at any cost, and I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. As I walked around the back of the lodge, something caught my eye. Thin wooden stakes poked out of the ground, each topped with bright orange flags. I knelt down and brushed away some dirt. The markings read, "Demolition, scheduled for next week." I felt the breath leave my lungs. The countdown had already started. After seeing the demolition stakes behind the seniors' lodge, I barely slept. I spent half the night pacing my living room, replaying the forged signatures, the whispered warning at the HOA meeting, Karen's secret conversation with the developer, and the stakes marking the countdown to destruction. Every sign pointed toward a conspiracy bigger than anything I had imagined. But if the Caldwell Trust still owned the land, then somewhere out there, a living beneficiary had the legal power to stop all of this. I just needed to find them. The next morning, I returned to the county records office and dug deeper into the trust files. Buried behind decades of archived documents, I found it, a name. Rebecca Ann Caldwell, listed as the final surviving beneficiary. There was a phone number next to her name, one that looked old, maybe outdated. Still, it was the only lead I had. I stepped outside into the parking lot, hands shaking slightly as I dialed the number. The line rang 3 times before a voice picked up, frail, trembling, but undeniably alive. Hello? Miss Caldwell? I asked gently. My name is Evan Miller. I live in Silver Pines. I'm calling about the Evergreen Seniors Lodge. The land under it still belongs to the Caldwell Trust. There was a long pause, followed by a soft gasp. I'm the last Caldwell alive, she whispered. What are they doing to our land? Her voice hit me like a punch to the chest. The fear in it, the confusion, the heartbreak. I explained everything. How the HOA was trying to demolish the lodge, how seniors still lived there, how forged documents had been filed under her name. There were moments when she needed to catch her breath, moments when I thought the call had dropped, but she listened to every word. I never approved anything, she said finally. I've been sick for years. I haven't signed a legal document since my diagnosis. The lodge, that place was my parents' last gift to this town. They built it after my grandmother passed, so no elderly neighbor would ever be alone again. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. She continued, I always intended for the lodge to stay protected. I knew one day someone might try to take advantage of my condition. That's why the trust rules are strict. No redevelopment without the beneficiary's direct approval. They must have forged my name. Hearing her confirm it made my blood burn. Ms. Caldwell, I promise you, I'm going to stop this. The seniors are terrified. The HOA is lying to everyone. I won't let them take your family's land. She let out a trembling breath. I believe you, Evan. You're the first person who's cared enough to reach out. Then, after a long, fragile pause, she said something I never expected. I'm too sick to handle the legal fight myself, but I can authorize someone to act on my behalf. Someone who cares about the lodge as much as my family did. My heart thudded in my chest. What do you mean? I can grant you temporary authority, power to protect the trust land, power to stop the demolition. If you're willing. Willing? I'd been willing since the moment I'd seen those bulldozers lined up at sunrise. Yes, I said firmly. I'll fight for your family's land, for every resident still inside that building. I won't let them erase what your parents built. By the next morning, her attorney had emailed the necessary documents. I signed, notarized, and flew to Arizona to meet Rebecca in person. She was frail, but her spirit was sharp, her gratitude genuine. She placed her thin hand on mine and said, "Go protect our home," and I intended to do exactly that. But when my plane landed back in Silver Pines and I stepped out of the car, I froze. Karen was standing in her driveway across from mine. Arms folded, jaw tight, eyes locked on me with a cold, knowing suspicion. She knew something had changed, and whatever she suspected, it terrified her. The morning after Karen watched me return from Arizona, I woke to the sound of paper fluttering in the wind. At first, I thought it was just the usual stack of grocery ads blown across my porch. But when I opened the door, my stomach tightened. At least a dozen neon-colored violation fines were taped to my front door, overlapping each other like a wall of warnings, each one stamped with penalties, hundreds of dollars in total, issued sometime between midnight and sunrise. I ripped one off and scanned it. Fence too high. Another said, grass length exceeds HOA standards. The next claimed, trash bins visible from the street. I stared at them, stunned. My fence hadn't changed in years. My grass was trimmed 2 days ago, and my trash bins were behind the garage where they always were. This wasn't enforcement. This was retaliation. Karen was weaponizing the HOA rulebook against me. I stormed into my yard, looking for anything that might explain the sudden violations. That's when I noticed the property line stakes along the side of my yard. The ones I placed after the county review were gone. Not removed neatly, yanked out, broken in half, tossed into the bushes as if someone wanted to erase the boundaries between my land and hers. I took photos of everything, time-stamped and organized. If Karen wanted a fight, I was going to be ready for it. But as I circled the yard, my anger shifted into something colder. Those stakes weren't just property markers. They were evidence of the trust land boundaries. Destroying them wasn't a prank. It was an attempt to blur legal lines, and Karen knew it. Before I could even finish documenting my yard, Miss Dorothy called. Her voice trembled through the phone. "Evan, the power's out again. 3rd time this week." I rushed over. The hallway lights were dim, emergency bulbs flickering like dying candles. Seniors sat wrapped in blankets in the common area, looking frightened and confused. A maintenance worker showed me the breaker room. The main switch had been flipped off forcefully, almost ripped. "This wasn't an accident," he muttered. I believed him. Someone was trying to make life inside the lodge unbearable. Force the residents out. Make them leave willingly so the HOA wouldn't face legal resistance. It was cruel, calculated, and exactly the kind of tactic Karen would use. I stayed for hours, helping the residents, reassuring them, documenting everything. I photographed the breaker room, recorded statements from staff, even wrote down the exact time the outage happened. Every detail would matter. By evening, I was drained, but more determined than ever. Back at home, I laid out all the evidence across my dining table. The fines, the broken stakes, the outage logs, the forged signatures from the trust documents. The pile of proof looked like a map of corruption, each piece pointing back to the same source. Karen wasn't just pushing boundaries anymore. She was escalating. When the sun finally set, I locked every door, every window. I didn't trust Karen, and I trusted the people she hired even less. I sat in my living room, sorting through photos, when a sharp crack echoed through the house. Glass exploded behind me. I dropped to the floor instinctively, heart hammering as shards rained onto the hardwood. A rock rolled across the floor and stopped at my feet. My hands trembled as I picked it up. A scrap of paper was tied around it with twine. I unwrapped it slowly. The message was only 3 words, written in jagged ink: "Stop or they suffer." The room felt suddenly colder. Karen wasn't just trying to intimidate me anymore. She was threatening the seniors. I was still staring at the threatening note when my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, half expecting another intimidation tactic, but something in my gut told me to answer. It was Rebecca's lawyer. A calm, steady voice that didn't waste time on small talk. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I've reviewed the condition of the Caldwell Trust, and I have to be honest with you. The only way to save it is to buy the land yourself." His words hung in the air like a verdict. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Buy it?" I asked quietly. "Why would I need to buy it?" "The trust is in danger of dissolution," he explained. "Old debts, unpaid taxes, administrative fees that have accumulated since Ms. Caldwell fell ill. If the trust collapses, the land becomes vulnerable to claim or foreclosure. If that happens, the HOA or the developer could swoop in legally." I sank into my chair. Karen had pushed hard, but now the threat came from something even bigger: time. The trust land wasn't just under attack. It was crumbling from neglect. The lawyer continued, "Rebecca wants the land protected, not lost. She asked me to offer it to you at a significantly reduced price, under one condition: that you keep the seniors safe." My chest tightened. I pictured the residents sitting in the dim hallway during the last power outage, Miss Dorothy clutching her sweater, Mr. Holloway looking worried but pretending to be brave for the others. I thought of Rebecca, frail in her Arizona home, trusting a stranger with her family's legacy. I didn't need time to think. "I'll do it," I said. "Tell her I'll take the land and protect the lodge, whatever it costs, whatever it takes." Over the next week, I drained my savings, took a small loan, and signed every legal document sent my way. It wasn't easy, nothing about it was, but each signature felt like a strike against the corruption that had seeped through Silver Pines. When the final paperwork arrived, notarized and sealed, the reality hit me. I wasn't just defending the trust anymore. I was becoming the legal owner of it. The morning I went to the county office to file the deed, I felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. The clerk recognized me instantly after all my recent visits. When she stamped the deed, her eyes softened. "Looks like you just saved that place," she said. "Not many people would have stepped up like this." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. Someone had to. Stepping outside, the sun hit me like a spotlight. Everything felt sharper, the colors, the sounds, even the breeze. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like the fight was shifting in my favor. I walked down the courthouse steps with the deed tucked under my arm, determined to tell the seniors that the land was safe at last, but I didn't get far. As I reached the bottom step, a shadow moved in front of me. Karen stepped out from behind a pillar, her arms crossed, her posture rigid. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She looked rattled. Her eyes dropped to the rolled-up deed in my hand. "So it's true," she said quietly. "You bought the land." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was written all over her face. She stepped closer, voice low and sharp. "You think you've won? You think buying that land changes anything?" I held her gaze. She leaned in, her breath cold against my ear. "You just made a very big mistake." Karen didn't give the community a day to breathe. Less than 24 hours after confronting me outside the courthouse, she called an emergency HOA meeting. No agenda, no explanation, just a bold, all-caps notice shoved into every mailbox demanding full attendance. It was her last desperate attempt to regain control, and I knew I couldn't miss it. So I walked through the doors of the community center with the deed folder tucked under my arm, the weight of it grounding me like a final piece of armor. The room was already overflowing when I entered. Dozens of residents filled every seat, others leaning against the walls. Conversations buzzed with worry and speculation. People had seen the bulldozers, the power outages, the survey stakes, and Karen's escalating behavior. The seniors' situation wasn't a secret anymore. Everyone knew something was wrong. They were just waiting for someone to say it out loud. Karen stood at the front, chin high, expression sharp enough to cut glass. When she saw me walk in, her jaw tightened. "Oh, look who decided to join us," she announced, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Our self-appointed hero." A few residents glanced at me sympathetically. Others turned away nervously, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. I took a seat near the front, keeping the deed folder visible on purpose. Karen slapped a stack of papers onto the podium. "We're here to discuss the dangerous misinformation being spread by Mr. Evan Miller." She pointed at me as if accusing me of a crime. "He claims the HOA has no authority over the Evergreen property." "That is false. He claims we forged documents." "That is false. And now he claims the land belongs to him." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Absurd." Murmurs rippled across the room. People looked confused and tired. They'd been dragged through months of her chaos. I stood slowly. "If it's absurd," I said calmly, "then this should clear it up." Karen narrowed her eyes as I opened the folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The papers did the speaking for me. "This," I said, holding up the stamped, signed deed, "is the official county-recorded transfer of ownership for the Caldwell Trust land. That includes the Evergreen Seniors Lodge, filed legally, approved legally, and now legally mine." Gasps broke across the room like a wave. The board members behind Karen exchanged panicked looks. One of them whispered something to another, shaking his head in disbelief. A woman in the audience stood. "Karen, is this true?" Another voice joined in, then another, until half the room was demanding answers. The tension that had protected Karen for so long cracked open right in front of her. Karen slammed her hand on the podium. "Everyone sit down. He's lying. He's manipulating you." I placed the deed on the podium beside her, pushing it toward her with just one finger. "Read it." She didn't. She couldn't. Her face flushed, her composure slipping. For the first time since this nightmare began, I watched her lose control. "This isn't over," she snapped, voice trembling. "He thinks owning the land means he controls the outcome. But I'm still the HOA president. And that gives you authority over HOA properties," I said evenly. "Not trust land. Not the lodge." A man from the back shouted, "So what have you been trying to pull, Karen?" Her eyes darted wildly across the room, panic turning to rage. She straightened her blazer, took one shaky breath, and screamed over the noise, "I'll get the county to condemn that lodge if I have to." The entire room fell silent. Because everyone knew, if she succeeded, ownership wouldn't matter. They would tear it down anyway. I barely had time to process Karen's threat about getting the county to condemn the lodge before the next hit came. 2 days after the explosive HOA meeting, I received a frantic call from Miss Dorothy. Her voice shook so badly I could barely understand her. "Evan," she whispered, "there's a man here saying he's from the county. He says the lodge is unsafe. He's telling us to evacuate." I drove faster than I ever had in my life. When I pulled up to the lodge, a white van was parked out front with magnetic lettering that read County Property Review. The man standing at the entrance wore a reflective vest and held a clipboard. His badge hung from a lanyard around his neck, but even from a distance, something felt off. The badge looked too glossy, too new, like it had never seen a day of real use. "I need everyone out now," the man barked at a nurse by the doorway. "This structure has been deemed hazardous." Hazardous? The lodge wasn't perfect, but it was far from dangerous. I marched straight toward him. "Let me see your ID." He huffed. "Sir, step aside. This is an official inspection." "ID," I repeated. Reluctantly, he held up the badge. I memorized the number and immediately pulled up the county inspector database on my phone, something the clerk had shown me how to access. The number didn't exist. Not inactive, not expired, non-existent. My voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "This badge is fake." He stiffened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes," I said, stepping closer. "I do. And you're not from the county." Behind him, seniors huddled nervously in the hallway. Nurses looked confused and frightened. And across the street, leaning against a mailbox with her arms folded and her foot tapping anxiously, stood Karen. She wasn't even pretending to hide her interest. She stared straight at us, stiff as a statue, waiting to see what would happen. I dialed the sheriff. "I have a man impersonating a county official," I said. "He's trying to evacuate a senior facility under false authority." The fake inspector's face drained of color. "Sir, let's not escalate. It's already escalated," I said. "Impersonating a government official is a felony." His clipboard slipped slightly in his hand. The sheriff arrived within minutes. Deputies surrounded the man, asking for credentials he clearly didn't have. Karen started backing away the moment she saw the patrol cars, moving toward her house with unnatural speed, but not fast enough to hide the panic in her eyes. One deputy checked the inspector's ID, then looked at him sharply. "This isn't real. Turn around." The man didn't protest. He didn't argue. He didn't even look confused. He simply lowered his head and placed his hands behind his back, as if he'd been expecting this moment. Residents gathered outside, watching silently while the deputies cuffed him and read him his rights. The seniors, who had spent weeks being bullied, threatened, and pushed around, stood together like a wall. For the first time, they weren't afraid. They were angry. As the sheriff prepared to place the man in the back of the cruiser, He motioned me over. "He wants to speak to you." I stepped close to the door where the handcuffed man sat. His eyes flicked up to mine. Exhausted, beaten, but strangely relieved, like he'd been carrying a weight he could finally drop. "They paid me," he whispered. "I didn't want to do it, but they paid me." "Who?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "A woman from your HOA." The words hit like a hammer, and I didn't need to hear a name to know exactly who he meant. Morning sirens shattered the quiet calm of Silver Pines before the sun had even finished rising. At first I thought it was another false alarm or some fire truck passing through. But when I stepped onto my porch, I froze. Federal vehicles, black SUVs with tinted windows and flashing lights, were rolling down our street like a moving storm. Agents in jackets marked with bold yellow letters rushed toward the HOA office. Neighbors poured out of their homes, murmuring in confusion, watching as the quiet little community we once knew was swallowed by the sound of authority. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, gripping the railing, watching the culmination of weeks of intimidation, lies, threats, and danger unfold in real time. It felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's story, until I saw Karen. She came marching out of the HOA office with the same self-righteous posture she always had, ready to confront whoever dared interrupt her control. But when she saw the agents, her expression changed instantly. Shock, panic, and then something close to despair. An agent approached her, spoke briefly, then took her by the arm. Karen yanked back. "There must be some mistake. I'm the HOA president." The agent cut her off, reading the charges loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. Document forgery, trust fraud, elder endangerment, conspiracy to defraud county officials. The words echoed through the street like a verdict delivered by fate itself. For a moment, Karen looked around wildly, as if searching for someone to rescue her. A board member, a supporter, anyone. But the people she once intimidated now stared at her with disbelief and disappointment. No one stepped forward. As the agents placed her in handcuffs, she locked eyes with me. And for the first time since I had known her, she didn't look powerful. She looked exposed. Across town, another team was hitting developer Grant Delaney's office. I learned later he tried slipping out a back door, hoping to escape before anyone noticed. But he didn't make it far. Agents cornered him in the parking lot and led him away, just as they had done to Karen. All the cover stories, all the forged documents, all the whispered deals, it all collapsed in a single morning. By midday, the entire community had gathered around the seniors' lodge, watching the chaos unfold from a safe distance. The residents stood with a kind of quiet pride, as if the walls of their home had finally exhaled after weeks of tension. Miss Dorothy hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes, whispering, "You saved us, Evan." But I shook my head. No. We saved each other. The lodge was safe. The land was protected. The truth had come out. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Just as I was about to head inside and check on the residents, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop, regarding Rebecca Caldwell. I opened it slowly. It was a letter from Arizona, and the first sentence told me Rebecca had passed away. The second said she had left me something important. I sat alone in my living room, the letter from Arizona resting in my hands. The edges were soft, the envelope thin, but it felt heavier than anything I had held throughout this entire battle. When I unfolded the paper, Rebecca's handwriting, steady but faint, pulled me in immediately. Her words were warm, personal, filled with a kind of trust I hadn't expected from someone I had known for only a short time. But what caught me off guard was the very first line. "My last wish is that the Caldwell land remains in the hands of someone who will protect it long after I'm gone." I had to pause, steadying my breath as I continued reading. Rebecca explained how her parents built the seniors' lodge with the hope that the elderly in town would always have a place of dignity, safety, and community. She wrote about how she had watched over the years as HOAs, developers, and political forces tried chipping away at that promise. "They don't see people," she wrote. they see property. The next paragraph hit me even harder. She had amended the trust before passing, officially granting me permanent stewardship of the land. Not temporary, not conditional, permanent. Her note ended with, "Protect them, Evan. Protect what my family built. Give Silver Pines the heart it has forgotten." I folded the letter gently, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. Rebecca had entrusted me with more than land. She had given me a legacy to guard. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. With Karen gone and the developer facing charges, the community rallied together in a way I had never seen before. We held meetings on the lodge lawn, discussing ways to restore the place, improve safety, and ensure the residents never faced another threat like the one they had just survived. I worked with local organizations to establish a protected senior community zone, land permanently shielded from redevelopment or condemnation. It became a sanctuary, not just legally, but emotionally. When HOA re-elections finally came, the results were staggering. Nearly every board member aligned with Karen was voted out. In their place came people who genuinely cared. Teachers, veterans, young parents, longtime residents who knew what community was supposed to mean. For the first time in years, people felt hopeful walking into an HOA meeting instead of fearful. Life at the lodge returned to normal. Laughter returned to the halls. The lights stayed on. And Miss Dorothy told me every chance she got that my mother would have been proud of me. Maybe she would have. I hoped so. Looking back on everything, the forged documents, the intimidation, the fake inspector, the near demolition, I realized something important. Courage isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's the quiet decision to stand up when everyone else steps back. It's protecting the vulnerable when the powerful try to exploit them. And it's choosing what's right, even when the cost is high. If you've stayed with me through this journey, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Like, subscribe and share this video and let me know your thoughts. And if you've ever dealt with a corrupt HOA, I want to hear your story. You might just help someone going through the same thing. Just when I thought everything had settled, my phone rang late one evening. The voice on the other end whispered, "Evan, there's another HOA doing something you need to see." And just like that, the next battle began.